Uh-huh. Yeah, it's so
So I've
many.
been teaching.
There's so much going on in the academic system. Like it just pulls you into this momentum, and you go, oh. And sometimes it's really slow and nice too. It's not always like hectic at all, but there's this momentum that's always there. Like something's coming up within a month or two,
Yeah,
always.
yeah.
Yeah. And
So
you lead meditation on campus, like with people in the room, or how does that work?
normally, before the pandemic, was on campus.
Hmm.
Sorry, I have a candy in my mouth. It's
No,
time to get the snack, so I just threw a mint in there. But
we're
since
talking
the
about
pandemic,
savoring and how good life is, and
yes,
the yeah.
since the pandemic, it's been all online. Um,
Okay. So do you guys meet on Zoom or how does like
yeah,
that's
Zoom.
awesome. And do you answer questions? Because I remember when I did
Yeah, we have a
meditation with
Q&A
John.
at the end. We
Uh-huh.
have a Q&A at the end. We
That's
talk a
awesome.
little before we start, say hello, whatever. I wait for people to show up, 5 minutes or so. And then we have just about a 20-minute meditation. Today it was like more like 28 minutes because I don't really keep strict time. Um,
I've
sometimes, just,
no, I've done like 4 or 5 of your meditations and I love that.
oh,
One you did you're like, oh, an image just popped into my mind and then you shared it. So I can appreciate the flexibility that you're doing. And but I also love the recap. I don't want to give like the idea that it's like some fast and loose meditation because you're a little unique that you at the end stop and say, "Hey, I did A, B, and C here," or you did A, B, and C here. Um, I thought that was
we,
pretty cool.
yeah, yeah, that's not anything that anybody else I've ever seen do, but I like to do that because I think people have these preconceptions that,
Hmm.
well, maybe sometimes they're not preconceptions, they're just conceptions that they've gotten from authoritative traditions
Mm.
that say this is how it's supposed to be done, right? But like I'm always mixing it up, and because my
Yeah,
philosophy
and
about it is like, what is meditation? It's you exploring your own consciousness. It's you moving around inside your own awareness. There's so many
mhm,
different ways to do it, and there's no right or wrong way. There are better and worse ways, but that depends on you.
mhm.
What's good for you doesn't work for the other person. So I like to constantly, I've learned so many techniques, but
Mhm.
usually they come in a tradition packaged a certain way. It should be this way, it should be that way. Do this first and then do that, and all that kind of stuff. And that can be quite useful. It's really good to have that kind of structure and
Mhm.
discipline and be part of a tradition. And the more that somebody is in a structured tradition, the knowledge that goes with that methodology works for that methodology. So again,
Mhm.
your teacher can say, "Oh yeah, that's what's going on. You're at this stage. That's what happens then because of this, and this is what you should do." Right? So there's the benefit of that, but then there's a disbenefit of thinking that that's the way it can only be, that that's how meditation is supposed to be,
Mhm.
and some of the meditation luminaries who I like are people like Krishnamurti, who
He's a funny
says
guy.
there's nothing you do. You don't do meditation.
Right. I've seen him in a recording almost stop talking because he could almost like I think sense that people were trying to like turn him into a guru and he like I don't want to become a figure but I do want to impress upon you that you have like this mental freedom that you're not acknowledging right now. Or it was really subtle and almost like cantankerous in a sense. But it was
Yeah.
like you probably know his work much more than me or him much more than me. But I liked it. It was really kind of delightful.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, and he influenced me a lot. And
Huh.
so that's why I'm pretty creative in my approach
Oh, I've
to
never thought of him as creative, but you're right. That's a good way to describe his methodology. It's not like
creative,
a linear.
spontaneous, not prefigured. Yeah,
Hmm.
not so structured. Not he's kind of iconoclast when it
What do you mean
comes
by
to,
that? Yeah.
well, all these models of how meditation ought to be. that are often dictated by religious metaphysics and whole traditions and cultural frameworks,
Hmm.
grammars, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, all of that is in a league with all of the other problems we've inherited from tradition.
Right, right. To tie it to the circling language and stuff, there's this ideological level, this dogmatic, and it's way up there. It feels like it's way low when people talk about dogma, but it's this intellectual thing that can pull you out of the moment. It can like put you in a weird path by following these rules and these opinions, and you're not actually gaining personal value from these things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's powerful because I was watching my friend Daniel shared a video, and there's these mountain running, and you said you like running, these mountain running monks, the marathon monks, and there's a kind of a base camp place at near a mountain, and then the head monk lives there with people that are there year round, and people kind of pilgrim there and run 100-mile laps in this small area, and it's
Whoa.
all like laced with ritual and oversight and ceremony and tradition. Really, it's beautiful, it's amazing and weird for me to watch, but very, very interesting.
That's fascinating. 100-mile laps. Oh my
The
goodness.
Marathon Monks, that was the name of the documentary. Yeah, but it was to like, it was an obedience. They were
Documentary, I
there
want to
to.
watch that.
Yeah, yeah, I'll
Marathon
I'll
monk.
send it to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to take notes with me. I'll follow up.
Okay. So how have you been?
Good. Yeah, I've Florida weather is gorgeous, and so I've been outside a lot and just enjoying life. Yeah, life's been really good down here.
Cool.
Let me
Well, I
think
had
of
a
something.
question for you that I just remembered. I spoke with John Vervaeke's Ecology of Practices Network guy, Nathan. I
Oh,
forget his
Nathan Vanderpool,
Yeah, Nathan
Vander
Vanderpool.
Clay,
I think it
Vanderpool.
was yesterday. Yeah,
Oh, I
Vander
love
Clay
Nathan.
is
Yeah,
the other guy. Vander Clay and Vanderpool.
I know.
Two Vander friends of Vervaeke. A lot of V's in John's world.
Well, he's
Um,
Belgian or something. I think he's
yeah, well,
yeah.
he's in Germany, but I don't know if I don't know what
No,
his
his
ethnic.
last name. I mean, before
Oh,
Canada, I think his lineage is Vander people.
oh, oh,
But
oh,
yeah,
John,
yes,
John.
Vervaeke. Yeah,
Oh,
John
I thought you were talking
Vervaeke. Yeah.
Nathan. In any
No, but
event,
yeah.
Nathan mentioned to me that that the people connected with Rebel Wisdom were making a documentary about John's work, and I said, "Well, you're making a documentary about John. Are you with Rebel
Well,
Wisdom?"
kind of, yeah. I just wanted to do this as like a rogue agent, just finding information for people. Because like there was so many people, it's like 20 people or something, 30 people almost that were on that group making that. And I just go like, they're so creative. I'm like a data scientist and like a practice person. Like, so I just asked a bunch of people some questions about it. But yeah, I was just and then I shared it with John and a few other people.
So
Um,
there's two documentaries. There's
no,
yours.
no, this is the
Oh,
same thing. Again, I was
oh,
just collecting data. Like to me, data is a thing in the universe that people use to like make good things. So I was
right.
just trying to gather some creative input, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Because yeah, that's the same topics they're exploring. And
I've seen a number of
Nathan's
their episodes.
documents and work were being shared by that group too. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, all I was saying is that I've seen a few podcasts or whatever that Rebel Wisdom has done. I think
Uh,
John was on one or two of them.
yeah, John's been on like 6 or 7,
Okay.
and uh, yeah, the his documentaries are awesome, right? Which ones did you watch, maybe? And we could
I
chat
don't
about those for a
remember. It
minute.
was a while ago, but
Okay.
and it keeps coming up on my feed because I subscribe to to the channel or whatever. But I haven't seen any of those in a while because I've just been really focusing on John stuff and on circling, and because I did this circling thing this weekend, so I was trying to really gear up for that and see anything I could. You sent me some links to gear up on, learn a little
Uh-huh.
bit about it before I went. So yeah, I mean there might be stuff on that on the Rebel Wisdom channel, but I
Yeah, he
haven't.
talks to Guy. He has a really good interview with Guy.
Oh, okay.
Um, what did you think of Guy? Yeah, let's just kind of talk about that stuff.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was really impressed with the what are we calling this? A retreat, the weekend, a workshop? I don't know, whatever.
All of those are valid. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
people choosing to like skill up their social identity or something like that. I don't know what it is.
And it's
Yeah.
kind of like a workshop, retreat, weekend, whatever.
Hmm.
In any event, the circling, I mean, circling wasn't the only thing that we did there, but you know, we did a few other
Yeah,
things.
weekend is pretty good, or retreat, right? Because I've never been to a long retreat, but it's like thematic, right? Don't people have a bunch of plan? It's not just sitting. There's often
Right.
like things being
Yeah, it
told and
depends. Yeah, the
shared.
terminology probably needs to be sharpened as
Well, you're the philosopher of meditation, so like, what's the word to use for this thing?
for the thing that we did with Chris, John, and Guy.
Hmm.
I guess that would be a workshop,
Okay.
weekend workshop, because it was a weekend long um,
Hmm.
thing. Workshops don't have to just be, a 2 hour thing or whatever.
Right.
So,
Come back for day two. Come back for day three.
right. But if there, because there was a significant amount of meditative and contemplative work, you, and you could even consider the circling to be a form of verbal meditation.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you mean by that? Like, how does that
well,
resonate with you?
you're engaging in mindful listening and mindful speaking, right? So those are meditative practices that you will do on a meditation retreat, on some meditation retreats. It depends on the tradition,
Hmm.
Not in Zen, you just sit there quietly and you get hit in the head with a stick if you nod, Um, it's just sitting in Zen. But mindfulness practitioners will often have a mindful speaking and listening exercise.
Hmm.
Or they might have a talking circle. It depends on who the teacher is and what tradition they come from. If I do something like that, I've had these little retreats that I run, that I've done maybe a little yoga, a lot of meditation, some kind of mindful speaking and listening exercises, and a little bit of circling before I even, you know, knew about circling with a little TM next to it. Um, Guy's particular technique. But I mean, I was taught this
What's
thing
the
called
value of that? Why would people want to do that when they're trying to live?
do what?
Do the circling while they're on a retreat. What's the value of practicing that stuff?
Well, mindful speaking and listening, in my opinion, maybe one of the ways in which we lose our mindfulness the most is when we're engaged in ordinary speech with other people, right? That's why, like, the Buddha put speech as one of the important 8 things to focus on in the Eightfold Path, right?
What
Speech.
happens? Like, how do people get lost in their speech? Because
Well, 2 ways, at least 2 ways.
okay, it's a
Speaking
myriad of ways.
Speaking and listening, those are the two major modalities. A lot of people, when they talk about speech, they're only talking about verbal production coming out of your mouth.
Right, doing,
There's
yeah.
also the listening. It's a dyadic thing, at least,
That's what
There's
Guy
at
said as well.
yeah, there's at least two components to it. We're both not just speaking. We're also hearing what we say, and we're thinking about it, what we're saying while we say it, right? So we could be mindless about that. We can be projecting. Those are the kinds of things
Hmm.
that you notice when you're trying to speak mindfully. You'll catch your ego. You'll catch some of your motives that are manipulating what you say and how you say it. You might notice that you're engaging in motivated reasoning, or your biases are coming up. It depends on how conscious you are and how much intention you bring to your
Hmm.
speech, how useful it could be for you to be mindful of your speaking
Yeah,
and
yeah,
your
yeah.
listening. Because even when you're listening, these are some of the things like mindful speaking and listening. There are structures, just like in the circling, there are structures, right? Instructions that structure how you're supposed to do it,
Right.
right? Being with you, I feel or I hear, right? And then listening to you, so those are prompts, that like sentence stems that help structure what you do, and that also facilitate and afford certain ways of doing it, right? But like in certain mindfulness based mindful speaking and mindful listening, like here's an example of, I mean, I just gave you some of the reasons why it might be useful.
Yeah, yeah.
But like in ordinary speech, those things are absent often. Like
Hmm.
you are projecting, you are engaging in motivated reasoning, your ego is involved, you're this, you're that, you get defensive, you're not aware of your body language, your tone, right? You destroy the channel like that
Ooh.
keeps things open between you and the person that when it becomes an argument that's philia nokia instead of philia sophia, to use John's
I love
language.
that. Yeah, because I think that was like Philia Sophia during the weekend a lot, right? And fellowship.
Yes.
So fellowship and Philia Sophia involved being a better listener and being aware that you're more than just like the words you're saying and the ideas you're saying, because there's a lot of
There's a whole
interpersonal.
gestalt.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
it's a
Gestalt stuff
holistic
you said
thing.
before. I had that in some notes that while I was thinking about today, because you had mentioned that before. This idea of the social Gestalt that's happening. Could you say that during a circle or during these group meditations that
Oh
there's a
yeah, yeah. And
social?
I think that when a flow starts
Yeah,
happening,
yeah, yeah. Group flow is kind of a crazy, awesome idea, right?
yeah, then that's something bigger than the individual nodes in the network.
That's what John says. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what they call logos happening, right?
Uh-huh. Now, when
So
you hear the word logos by someone like that, what do you hear them saying? Because I've
yeah,
take that word so.
this is one of these very powerful, juicy, suggestive, almost symbolic, like when John talks about symbols, that you can kind of go through a symbol into something beyond the symbol, right? So even the word logos is like a symbol because, in the gospel, in the beginning was the logos, and
Mhm. Or even the Boober thing we had, right? Wasn't it word is spirit was that little phrase in the middle?
yeah, that's right. So yeah, I have like a multitude of possible meanings for logos because I mean, there are mystically oriented philosophers, and I don't know if this is what Neoplatonists think because I'm relatively new to thinking deeply about Neoplatonism. John's, awakened that interest in me, but I haven't had a chance to do the readings I started doing some of the readings that he gave me a short list of things that would save me a lot of time finding my way around in the dark of the tons of things written about Neoplatonism, right? But
Yeah.
like there's mystical understandings of logos where logos is kind of like the Holy Spirit, the way Christians think of the Holy Spirit, like it's like the mind of God or something like that. Like so that's a really metaphysically
Mhm.
heavy interpretation of the logos,
Yeah, and I want to
right?
interrupt a little bit. Is there a Buddhist corollary to that? Like, because I've never kind of connected Greece to Buddhism very well.
Yeah, I don't know. I,
There might not be, and that's just why I
yeah,
thought of it.
yeah, because I heard a lecture this morning for an hour and a half. One of my Buddhist scholar associates, Amber Carpenter, gave a paper about Democritus and atomism, Greek atomism,
I wanted to talk about atomism today. Yeah.
and then Vasubandhu, who is he's on the cusp of early and later Buddhism, um, his atomism, and how they were different. They're motivated differently, and
Hmm.
therefore they make different affordances for terms of ethics and whatnot. It was pretty complicated and
Yeah.
interesting, but I remember her saying, and somebody asked her, another friend of mine, Douglas Duckworth, I think it was him who asked her um, in the Q&A, what's the link between this kind of talk about, atomism and like conceptions of the one,
Ooh, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And she said something, and this is a general Buddhist attitude is like a kind of negative. I don't mean that in a moral sense, but like in theology, negative theology is it's more about what you can't say, or when you talk about ultimate reality, you do it in negative terms. It's not this, it's not that,
Mm.
right? So you're deconstructing and de-reifying anything that's supposed to stand for ultimate reality, and Buddhists are big on
Yeah,
that
yeah.
deconstructive negative approach. So she just emphasized that in some way. I forget how she worded it, but like there's no thing there. So
Let me
that
throw this
that's
at you from the Kyoto school,
yes, the
Nishitani.
Nishitani and
Yeah,
Nishida,
yeah, because
no thingness. Yeah. Yeah. S- So I don't know what to say about that. Like I I I know that John has said that was it Nishitani, one of the best five books he's ever read was about nothing, religion and nothingness or
right,
something
that's
like
his
that.
primary, like his most famous
Yeah, and I
work.
have the book and I started reading it, but I didn't get far enough into it because I have a million things going on. But yeah, I don't know enough about that school to answer that. Maybe you can tell me. I'm curious. Like, what's their conception of nothingness? It's not like nihilistic. Is it more like a one kind of thing?
Well, it's hard to say because they're very exploratory. So they have this idea of paradoxicality, which is so like the kind of good dialectic ambiguity that like the Greeks have, that kind of being able to hold the tension, the tonos of life, of conceptual, dialectic that's happening in front of you. And so, but they push on those boundaries so well that it's hard to even categorize them from that. But like Shunyata, I think they would say is some kind of like unity that transcends opposites. And so when you start to have a subject object divide as a final resting point, they would kind of challenge that and say, well, that's on the far side, the abstract side, but what's on the near side right here in that paradoxicality, and just try to pull the tension into some new place than any kind of abstract final proposition that you could sit on, which the Logos is very word oriented. So saying words are generated from this kind of primordial creative being. The Greeks, Heraclitus does really well sometimes, right? But I don't know if they don't like language. They don't really focus on the linguistics the way
Right.
like Nietzsche was a philologist. Do you have philologists at your school?
Um, Not to my knowledge, we might.
Yeah, but see, I mean, like a philologist just basks in the logos, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, so this is the complexity, the multiple ambiguity of the term
Hmm.
logos. Like if you might want to just interpret logos as the property of intelligibility in the
Yeah.
cosmos,
And
right?
then when we talk about it in groups, it's like this distributed cognition enacting that.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, yeah, so it depends on how mystical you want to go in terms
Sure.
into mystical metaphysics, where, in a really rich, robust, like non-naturalistic sense, right?
Yeah, and they
Sci-
do. The Kyoto School
Yeah,
definitely does.
scientists are naturalists generally, right? So,
Hmm.
but some have this idea that no, this is like the mind of God. All the intelligibility is there's no duality, so it's everywhere.
Hmm.
Everything is this intelligibility, and it's something like the mind of God. It's something like the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
It's pregnant with infinite intelligibility, and everything comes out of that. It
Hmm.
depends. There are people who treat the logos just like in those very, very mystical, heavy metaphysics
Well,
terms.
then the metaphysical stuff gets really interesting, right? Because especially with some Japanese Buddhism, they write about Shinran. Do you read about him, or do you know much about Shinran Buddhism,
No,
Shin
I mean I
Buddhism?
know the name, but I don't know much.
Well, the Zen, we brought up Zen a couple times, and Zen, they have self power. So you're trying to kind of unite with your self power or something like that. But then Shin Buddhism, which is, I guess, hugely popular in Japan as well, historically and currently, I guess, they would have this other power. So it's almost like Christian redemption, or, I think of Joan of Arc, who she does not think she's the center of the universe at all, right? Like Joan of Arc is on a different level than her neighbor, let's say. So this idea of like humility maybe is a Christian virtue that might get at some of the Shin stuff. But it's unspeakable, right? Like when you have that level of humility, like, oh, we're so separated from God. Like Shin Buddhism does that.
Interesting. So let me circle back a little
Yeah, I
bit
don't know
to
if they, we keep
No, that's okay. The mindful speaking and listening. Here's one of the things that I've done this with my students in
Uh-huh.
philosophy classes, just to kind of get them to be mindful of the way that they enter philosophical dialogue in the
Mm,
classroom. Just try to kind of wake them up a little bit,
that's excellent.
because they normally, like, they're insecure, so they're going to be defensive,
Hmm.
and people, when you start debating, your sense of self seems, for many students, like you are being
Right,
challenged.
you're right. If the idea falls apart, it's a personal failure or something.
Yeah, yeah. And so here's one exercise. So break everybody up in the group into dyads,
Hmm.
and pick some arbitrary thing, like they're all facing each other, right? The left side of the room, the right side of the room, everybody, in pairs, or that way, so that you could say
Uh-huh.
everybody who's on the left is A and everybody who's on the right is B, or whatever, right? So
Hmm.
you start with A, and um, I would ring my little meditation bell, ring the bell, and time 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to just speak to B
Hmm.
about whatever. Maybe it would be about your experience in the meditation that we just had, right? A little 5 minute meditation or whatever, or about the reading that we just did, some
Hmm.
Platonic dialogue or whatever, right? Just A tells B whatever is on their mind about the topic, whatever the topic is, and it doesn't matter what the topic is, but you want
Hmm.
to pick topics that will be nourishing somehow or another.
Hmm.
Um, and B should try to be not exaggerated poker face, but kind of poker face. Like, try not to nod a lot and smile a lot and go, try not to give any kind of feedback to
Uh-huh.
the speaker when you're the listener, right? Just try to be a sponge, right? And just really listen. And while you're listening, notice your own tendency to agree or disagree, and just try to shut that off. Because what a lot of us do is we're thinking, as we're hearing the other person speak, oh, now I know what I want to say, or I
Hmm.
disagree, or I have a comeback, or I have another point, or that's not right, or right. So, like, notice that and try to disable it, and just take in what the other person is saying. That's the listener's
Yeah, yeah,
instructions.
yeah.
And then you ring the bell after 2 minutes, and then B repeats back to A everything that B heard,
Hmm.
paraphrasing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But in B's own words. It's not just parroting. It's the same kind of advice that we got. I
Hmm.
forget what
Hmm.
exercise we did at the circling weekend, but I remember hearing this: don't just paraphrase.
Right, they said it
Uh,
multiple times, yeah.
yeah. And then, okay, so that's one cycle. And then you ring the bell 2 minutes. And then when A is hearing that, like if B is saying things that A thinks you didn't hear me right, he's not supposed to go like, you know, he's A, when he's hearing his own speech being reflected back to him, should be poker faced too,
Uh-huh.
so that he can differentiate his reactions and just hear, this is what B heard me say.
Right, that's hard to do as an adult,
Yes,
as
it's
a
very hard
person.
to do. It's
Yeah.
very hard, right? So, but it makes you mindful of
Right.
your
Well, it's
own.
feedback. It's really, really rich, true, valuable feedback. Like the true,
Yeah.
what is that? A transcendental, what do they call that? The
The
true.
true, the good, and the beautiful, the
Right. So this is the
transcendental.
true happening really
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah. So then that's one round. A speaks to B, B speaks to A. Then you ring the bell, and then B goes again, but now B says what B thinks about the subject to A, and A has to listen. Then you ring the bell, and then A repeats back to B what A heard B say. So it's this, both get to be the speaker of their own original thing and hear it mirrored back to them. Both of A and B,
Hmm.
right? So, like, I speak, you relate it back to me. Um,
And you're not trying to be competitive or overly sympathetic. Like those are kind of the
Nothing.
two extremes or
Right.
something.
Right. And that's
Um,
the same, that's the projections. That was some advice. Like, don't
mhm.
just embellish and agree upon, and don't, you know, be defensive or competitive or whatever. Right.
Hmm.
So when you're competing, that's a projection. And when you are overly identifying, that's also a kind of projection. So yeah, so then if you want, and it's useful, it does, not everybody does this stage, but I think Guy did something like it.
Yeah, yeah.
But so that's one, two, three, four. Step five is free dialogue about what that was like.
Hmm.
Where you
What's the
both,
value of that? Because that's part of philosophical fellowship from Randall Have too. Like, why is the open part at the end?
well, my intuition, I haven't read anything about what the rationale for
Yeah,
that is.
yeah.
So, but my intuition is that you now have an opportunity to share that something develops, just like in the circling,
This could be
right?
the logos or something.
Yes, something develops that's greater than the sum of the parts, and you have an opportunity to share that. And it's almost like the dialogos part after the dialectic,
Hmm.
right? It's more spontaneous, so you kind of allow the whole thing to just flow a little more naturally without the structure. The structure helps to get the movement happening.
Hmm.
But then once that's opened up, spontaneous communication, which should happen in a really nice way,
Hmm.
because you've listened, really listened, and were really listened to,
Hmm.
right? So then you both feel safe, open, understood, recognized, and then you can share that. And you could even share, like, that was hard for me to hear that because I realized that I didn't express that. What you said is what I said, but that's not what I wanted to convey.
Right, right. That part is the actual unique value that a group
Yeah,
gives
that's
each individual.
right. So it's good to hear that. Also, we're not perfect at poker face. So our eyes reveal things, right? So,
Hmm.
like when you're mirroring back to me, you might see in my eyes that
Well, and
that's
circlers will say like it's always a surprise. They're always getting better, and so you're always pulled in by your biases or your personality or your tendencies, right? Like that's what makes it like a practice or a like a do. Is that a Japanese way to say like one of these
Do
kind of
in Japanese or Dao in Chinese is the same thing, like Judo, Bushido, Aikido,
right, your
Karate
martial arts,
Do.
right? Like you can do
Yeah,
this kind of with your body and your intention with people on the mat, and
yeah.
uh especially opening up to people, like not oh your feelings, but I mean like just being open to them as a person, like all of their personhood, is really what makes that different than like what you could have at a Starbucks maybe.
Right. Yeah, it goes really deep, and you can feel really vulnerable. It depends
Right.
on the other person or persons in this circling thing. One of my
Hmm.
circling encounters, one of the other participants I sensed felt quite vulnerable because one of the other ones, I wouldn't say it was philia nokia, but it was something more like that than the Sophia thing.
It's
Um,
tough to do. It's a hard, like you're saying it like, oh, I've taught this, I've done it, I appreciate it. But yeah, in those, that's why they kept saying at the end, like, did anyone have any wheels fall off? Because they kind of anticipated that a little bit, I think.
yeah, and the woman who was in one of my groups, I think she said I had a really rough round in one of
Hmm.
my, that I forget her name.
Well, we don't want her name because if we're recording this, we should say like,
Yeah,
or I
yeah,
can cut that out too. But
right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, even if I did remember her name, I shouldn't say it. You're right. But there was somebody who, in the aftermath, when asked, did any wheels
Hmm.
fall off, she did say, I had a rough go of it. And I thought that she did.
Hmm.
And I thought that the reason was, I might be wrong about
Of
this,
course,
that
yeah.
one of the other participants, like, you're supposed to build on what the other person said,
Hmm.
right? And not completely reject it, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
a that's a big part of the practice because there's all these levels of appreciation of attention and different roles that are
yeah,
happening, and
yeah. And I'm
yeah.
new to that. I'm new to the circling
Yeah,
and
it's not a
all.
science. This is an art.
Right. But
Yeah.
when I hear the instructions, I try to really keep with them. So I
Of
remember
course. Yeah.
hearing that you should try to build on what the last person said,
Hmm.
right? Hearing that, I propose, right? The next thing.
But yeah, because a big part of circling is like be in the other person's experience. And if you're not bringing in the other person, how could you have even done that?
Right.
Or
So it's
you're
like
not
a
doing it
great,
anymore, I should say. I shouldn't blame anyone, but at that point, you want to be building this thing, like you were
yeah.
saying.
And it wasn't really just one person. There were two people in the group. Like I think I initiated that one. I
Hmm.
was the first person to go.
Cool,
I don't
yeah.
remember the details, but well, I proposed something first.
Hmm. Do you
And then
remember
the
the
next,
virtue?
um, yes, Sophrosyn. It's a
Wow.
Greek word. I don't know if you remember the meaning of it.
Yeah,
It's
it's like an
ordinarily
intentional.
it's ordinarily translated as temperance. And in one of John Vervaeke's talks, I had recently heard, so it was fresh in my mind. He said he mentioned another Greek term that's similar but different, which is enkratia or enkratia. Kratia, like krasia, in democracy, right? That means control. And enkratia is the ability to self-control. And akrasia is weakness of will when you can't control yourself.
Hmm.
You don't want to do X, but you do it because you can't control your desire or something like
Right, or
that.
impulse, yeah.
Yeah, so that's that. That's one wing, and this I've always associated temperance with that ability. But
Hmm.
John, in a talk that I heard recently, said no. There's enkratia, but there's also this Sophrosyn, Sophros, either UN or YNE. I've seen it spelled both ways.
Hmm. Yeah,
And he said,
Hadot
this
talks
is,
about it.
this is temperance. Who?
Pierre Hadot.
Hado. Yeah. So he said that's more like, so when you've got the self-control, you desire something that you know you shouldn't desire, and you need to resist it with your will. You need to control yourself. But Sophrosyn is more like you're just naturally attracted to the good.
Right, right. You've internalized the good, the desire for the good, and you're no
Yeah, so
longer at
there's
that.
no struggle. There's no
Yeah,
struggle. And so my proposal was about that. And I don't remember exactly how
sure,
I
sure.
worded it, but I think I said something like it's I like the way you put it. I didn't use those words, but it was something like that. Like it's almost like you're in a flow state with respect to your desires.
Hmm.
There's a harmony between your desires and your meta desires. It's like a
Hmm.
Frankfurt kind of thing
Well, I
where,
was thinking that, yeah, and the harmony part is beautiful, right? What you're
yeah,
saying.
where it's spontaneous that you've cultivated your will to the point where you don't have to exert self-control. It automatically manifests the right relationship with your desires and your actions or
Yeah,
something. I
yeah.
forget whatever it was. It was something like
Well,
that.
because you're having a sensibility transcendence, he says, and so you're framing pre-conscious before you even start willing is already kind of like put that down on the side, like the child. John would say,
Right,
like, I can go into a room and see child's toys, and I'm not like wanting to touch them the way like his son would or a young person would.
right,
So it's the whole
right.
transcendence of that,
Yes, you've transcended a whole mode of being.
right?
But yeah, yeah.
Not through the will either. It's like not the, like you said,
No, it's just the cultivation over time. It's habituation and whatnot, or it might be just insight, then
both, right? Like
your
loving
perspective
some the world
shifts. And
differently. Yeah.
yeah, just like one of the analogies, I forget who made this one, but like when you're a little kid, you can really enjoy the feeling of wet sand in your toes and all that stuff, right? And the sounds and everything. But then when you're an adult, you want to read your book at the beach, and that's just not available to you, generally speaking, unless you're a certain kind of person, like a hippie or something. You've generally moved beyond that way of being in your body that kids naturally are
Mm,
in, right?
mm.
So it's kind of like developmental shifts, threshold
Well,
for
and to
people.
have conscious attention on ideas and abstract things, you can't be taking that sensory information in that a child
Right.
has,
Like, yeah.
right?
And some of us can retain all of those abilities, right? And still enjoy them all. It depends on the person.
And they're
But yeah,
trainable, right? Yeah.
yeah. But in any event, so then the next person who I picked to listen to me seemed to be coming from a Buddhist perspective because they said, well, I hear you saying this, but I think of it, and he thought of it in kind of opposite terms, where, like, from a Buddhist point of view, you don't arrive there through a developmental process of self-cultivation, through lots of habituation or acts of resisting desires when you realize that they're not in your best interest or whatever. He
Hmm.
says he didn't use the word, but he was conveying that that's a deprivation model for this ability. Whereas from, he didn't say it, but I sensed it was a Buddhist perspective.
Hmm.
And he used some terms later on that made me think, oh, he's quite familiar with Buddhism. But
Sure.
he said something like, it's more like that's our natural state, Sopherson, right? Uh, we come into the world with that,
Uh-huh.
and we're conditioned by a variety of societal and other forces
Hmm.
to lose that ability.
Hmm.
And, and those things are like defilements, that's a Buddhist concept, that are
Hmm.
imposed on this natural state of ours. And if we kind of just shake off those defilements, we've got Sopherson, right? And I thought, okay, he took a completely opposite view of what I did, but it didn't affect me because I'm quite cognitively flexible, and I enjoy, I love being cognitively empathic, cognitive empathy.
Well, and that's the point. It's not to like perfect your view. It's to actually
Right,
just play with a new virtue. Like
right.
if you do this once a month at 12 months, you've played with 12 virtues for an hour. Like that's the benefit. It's not to practice perfecting
Yeah,
either of your views.
right. But
Um,
like in standard, let's just say analytic philosophical discourse, like what I was exposed to in graduate school and when I go to the American Philosophical Association conventions and stuff like that, somebody who proposed what I did and would feel contradicted
yeah.
by the other person. And it becomes this philia nokia kind of thing where now I need to defend my view and
Hmm.
argue about why his view is incorrect or something like that. But like none of that was in my head at all because
Hmm.
I get this and what its values are. And I like, oh, because things are multidimensional and they have many sides to them, and they can be viewed through many different possible lenses. And that's the whole
Hmm.
point of this, right? Looking at the world through everybody else's eyes, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
which is part of the Jain philosophy, which I love. I don't know if you know this term, Anekantavada. Vada means doctrine in Sanskrit, and ek means one, and a in front of ek is anek, which means not one, and Anekantavada or ekanda, I'm not sure which, I'd have to see the root, is sided. So it means non one sidedness view,
Mm.
right? So it's a metaphysical view, but it has epistemological implications that the world is multiply sided,
Hmm.
it's multiply dimensioned, it's multiply aspectual, right? And we're all situated, the epistemological part of it is that we're all situated relative to certain aspects of it that we
Hmm.
have access to, right?
Hmm.
So it's a kind of pluralism, right? That reality is almost ambiguous. I've heard John say reality might itself be ambiguous.
I like that. I think there's
Yeah.
something
Yeah, I
very
like that idea.
attractive to
Well, when you
that.
think about quantum physics, right? It's indeterminacy, right? The Schrodinger's cat, this kind of thing. That's ambiguous, right? It's neither,
Well, yeah.
this kind of thing, right? And that's the fundamental building blocks of everything else, right? So, but I love that view. And so for me, I don't mind being completely contradicted by, even if somebody's doing philia nokia with me. It used to
Hmm.
bother me when I was a grad student and I had my ego was being threatened and all that kind of stuff. But even then it didn't bother me
Well,
that much because I had this kind of perspective. But over the years, I've really just learned to embrace this approach to things. So I didn't experience that at all. But then um, the next person, right, the next person who I said it was almost like philia nokia for
hmm.
that person rejected both of what we said, right? And came out really strong in language I didn't expect to hear in a circling kind of,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Said something like, if there's no resistance to an unwanted desire, then it's not self control. And if it's not self control, if there's no agent in there, right? Spontaneous behavior or even habituation. If it's habituation, it's zombie like robotic, right? I don't remember the language. I'm embellishing it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's
But
great.
he was like, then it's not temperance, right? By definition, and he's like, okay. He was really strong, and he's got this kind of visage about him that's
Uh-huh.
very kind of, impressive.
Well, and you're
Um,
you're task oriented at that point. You're not in the play of the dialogue when you're being
Yeah,
that
well, I
task
wasn't sure.
oriented.
I'm new to this. This is my first circling. I've seen a
Yeah.
couple of them, but and I thought, well, I don't know. Maybe he's one of these people who does this a lot, and that's just his way. You know, and and we're supposed to be challenged, and we're supposed to grow. We're supposed to be
Hmm.
in a zone of a little bit in our discomfort zone, right? And so I didn't. It didn't affect me, but a kind of I can sometimes be almost like an empath. I sensed that this woman was having a rough time hearing all of that,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And it seemed like she was because after he was done with the first round of
Hmm.
what he said, she said, she looked troubled. She paused for quite
Oh,
a while. And then she said, could you repeat that? I don't think I understood you. Right. And she was so gentle about it. Right. And
well, that's
and
good.
like he did it again, right? Almost the same way, maybe even more emphatically or something. I don't
Huh.
know. And and then she was, you could see that she was struggling,
Yeah, yeah,
emotionally. And then she actually turned to me and she said, Rick, it wasn't my turn. I was, 3 times removed from it or
yeah.
whatever.
She was having
She
a
said,
situational awareness. Yeah.
I need a little help here,
Hmm.
right?
It's
So
tough because they don't model how to talk about philosophy or religion or art or any of these kind of things. Um, and some like I mean, you're a philosophy teacher. Some teachers are just so good at keeping it. Okay, well, what does it have to do with comedy or tragedy or family? And they can just keep it alive and broad. And there's a place for everybody, and there's a place for people to enter into. But then I mean, like even college professors or high school professors at really well-intentioned people, again, they just see it as this kind of winner take all joust. I don't know if you've heard the language of like the jousting game, and it's like it becomes like this tournament of champions where like this woman is almost like an innocent bystander, and she's like, oh my gosh, I dropped my doll in the middle of the tank line and I had to run and grab my doll. And it's kind of like that. And it's tough because everyone's enthusiastic and eager, and maybe people haven't eaten in a while, or it does take a lot of concentration to do these things. Like I know almost the way like a child needs a nap. Sometimes I'm just like, I've been paying attention to my feelings and other people's words so long that like my habitual reaction is starting to presence itself more or something like that.
yeah, and I have an
What did you
instinct.
do? Yeah, what did you
I was
do?
just going
Yeah.
to say, I have an instinct to be a kind of moderator and,
When you have the experience, yeah, I mean, you're perfect
met,
in that.
meta level timeout, this kind of thing. And, but I try not to do that because I don't want to be that guy who's
No.
jumping in and not letting things happen either. But she asked me, she named me
Oh, of
and
course, yeah. I think that's
asked
appropriate.
me.
Yeah.
So I don't remember exactly what I said, but I think, oh, that's right. In that fellow's second round to her when she said I don't understand, he actually put her on the spot and said, "Well, what do you think about this, and this? Could this be possible if that like I don't remember how it was, but he really put her on the spot." That's when she asked for my help. And so what I said was, I'm going to only speak from like the meta level about the process, and I
Hmm.
think in your turn, she didn't understand you, so she asked you
Good for you. Yeah, yeah.
to explain it to her. And now you're asking her questions to answer. And that's not what's supposed to be happening right now. You're
Good.
supposed to
Yes.
be trying
Perfect.
to convey to her what you said the first time in terms that she could better understand because she
Yeah.
told
Yeah.
you she didn't understand you. And I think can you do that? And I was like, oh, okay. And so then he tried that. He was still pretty strong like the first round, but at least
Hmm.
he took her off the hook. Um, and then she repeated back, I hear you saying this. And she did a pretty good job of repeating back what he said. And then I think she picked me to be her listener because she
Well,
felt
good. Yeah.
my simpatico, she needed a little support after that because it was a
That's a
rough round.
big deal, Rick. Like, have you ever done public speaking, or do you remember like some of your students when they're doing public speaking, you can see their nerves like shutting them down? Just
Yeah.
one smile in the crowd, or like your grandmother just waving at you, you're like, oh, and you just kind of like renormalize.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really good. Like you said, I don't think, and I this is me thinking about myself too. Like, I never want to stop and interrupt and like become an authority or something like that. But you do want to honor the practice at some point, and definitely the individuals. Like if someone's starting to feel uncomfortable, it's even probably good to say like, hey, why don't we just stop for a minute? Like you said, why don't we just what are we could even bring in like anagage, the idea of just slowing down and soaking in what's happening and going, okay, let me marvel at that. Let me just be curious for a moment instead of a statement based or whatever our mind
I
does when
think
it's
I think I was the one who almost every time in that circle reminded us when we were supposed to pause.
well,
I
and you're providing a unique role in that circle at that point. That's really awesome. That when one member does that, that is distributed cognition kind of, right? Because you're providing a function. And that's a really good one because savoring social feelings or whatever the dynamic you want to call it dynamic, it really does just slow it down one extra beat and then let everyone kind of orient towards the moment rather than their thoughts or what they were about to say. Like you were saying earlier, just this eagerness to kind of keep the intellectual drama going. Um, but that, yeah, just because the slowness is hard to do. That's the whole skill you can practice like a lifetime on, is getting the tempo right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny when you take the pause and everybody closes their eyes, then you do this thing. See when are people back. You open up one eye. Have they come back yet? Or you think it's enough time until you go, you make a little sound, and then people
Okay.
come and check and open their eyes to see if everybody else is back. Or you could just say, okay, all right, let's go.
Right.
Um,
How
there's a
did the
lot.
group tend to respond? Could you see any body language or the tone of the conversation after you kind of did these pauses?
Yeah, I think that it helps. It slows people's speech down
Mm,
a little bit.
hmm.
Their composure seems to, instead of being nervous and a little tense and,
Hmm.
am I doing it right and all that, like it relaxes people.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes the process, I think, a little more fluid. That particular circle ended quite well.
Nice.
I'd be curious to speak to that woman about it afterwards. I might try and find out. I took some screenshots of everybody's face and name so that I
Hmm.
could remember who was who. So I plan on when I've been so busy, but go in and find out what was her name again and find her email and just ask her, hey, would you like to talk about that? I
Oh,
was curious,
good.
you know, um,
Yeah,
because
because
I went
there's that,
last.
like
He
that's
picked
a real
me.
moment, right? That part, that interaction was maybe one of the most human things, you know, happening. And it is so interesting that you're curious about her and her reaction.
Yeah,
And
I don't know why she picked me. Maybe it was because I had reminded them about what stages we were in the process a couple of times, like it's time for us now to pause. So, maybe that's the only reason why she picked me to say I
hmm.
need a little help, Rick. Um, you know, but then she also picked me to be the next person that she spoke to.
Hmm.
And then I was the last one. The timing just worked out that way. And I was very happy to be able to bring in what the first person, not my, what I said, what the Buddhist guy said, what the you have to be an agent in conflict guy said, and whatever she said. I don't remember what she said, but I integrated all of them
Hmm.
in when I said, well, I hear you saying that, and I tie it in with what he said, and I tie that in with what he said, and I tied it in with what I said, and that's my conception. If we were going to go another round, I would propose that, and it integrated everything, and I was so
Nice.
happy about that. But then we didn't have a chance to talk about it. We got pulled out of the room, you know. Oh, that's another thing. All those things, every single thing that I did, every exercise that I was in,
Hmm.
needed twice the amount of time just to complete it.
Yeah, why? Just because like if someone heard this that would care. What were some of the
But
time? What were some of the things that were like stealing the time or?
oh, well, we just didn't like suppose it said you should in like the philosophical fellowship thing, you know, pick somebody who's going to read the passage,
Hmm.
right? And then that person picks a saying from the passage. Then you chant it 4 times. And then, like, that's as far as we got, right? Let's just say. Or
Wow,
there was
yeah.
maybe two more steps or whatever. Or, there was frequently one or two more steps, or we were supposed to go around at least twice before we go on to the next step or whatever. I don't remember the details,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it was like that every single time. But I think it was because we were all thoughtful and we were all
Mm.
being conscientious.
Oh,
And
nice.
many of us, it seems to be, were new to this because I frequently had, not just me, but a number of us that I was in rooms with, these breakout rooms, forgot the sequence. I always had notes of what we were supposed to do right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, good.
Because, when you start doing this, you forget.
There's a lot of details for sure
You get
too.
so drawn in that you forget, well, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
Um, A, but B, when you're going off script, sometimes that's where all the good stuff happens anyway. So
Hmm.
these like sentence stems and things like that, the instructions are to get a flow happening. But if a flow starts happening, and I've seen it on some of the videos that have demonstrated, when the flow starts happening, you go off script and
Right,
you forget
right.
to follow it. So,
And you're
so
mature enough and like you have enough like insight to go, oh, let's not worry about the rules.
yeah, I thought it was everything that we did was great. But I would have liked, like, we didn't get to dialogos really when we did the dialectic to dialogos. We
Hmm.
just finished the dialectic part, and we didn't have time to then have the free form, open,
Hmm.
flowing thing.
Yeah, one of ours did end kind of too short. I would say it was just starting to flow, and there was a lot of really good like communitas happening, and people just being very interested in each other and just kind of spontaneously sharing things that everyone would appreciate. And then like you said, like there's like time is up, and one time I was even like I had this exciting I was like, oh yeah, 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 and then like the room ends and you're just
Yeah,
your
yeah.
speech is trailing. So did you have a like did you like the hesychastic prayer or the fellowship or like the dialectic and the dialogus? What would you like to do again if you were ever to do any more of those things,
Oh,
if anything?
I like all of them.
Yeah.
I liked everything that we did. It was awesome. I love
Uh-huh.
this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Why is it such a like why is it better than just shopping, or why is it better than politics? Like the news is crazy and people like everyone keeps telling me about the news, and why is this so much more rewarding than like all those things people care a lot about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I'm not really so sure. I think that it's a really complicated question.
Hmm.
And I would also like to hear your answer to it when I'm done. But
Yeah.
it might just be like the kind of people who are drawn to this are drawn to it. And I think you might have to be at
Hmm.
a certain level of psycho, spiritual, existential, philosophical self awareness
Hmm.
to be able to recognize the nutritive value nutritive to your soul, the
Hmm.
Socratic care of the soul, like how empowering, or it's almost like soul nutrients to engage in these activities. They're like nutriments for the soul. So like I joke around with, and I tease my wife about this. Like she can sit there and watch, binge watch a show on Netflix or something, and I'll be close enough to where I could hear the dialogue and everything, and
Hmm.
I'll just think, what a waste of time, you know? And I'm over here doing philosophy or something, I'm
Hmm.
reading something, or I'm writing something, or I'm whatever. I'm doing something in this domain,
Hmm.
whether it's analytic philosophy, writing about meditation, it doesn't matter what it is. Those things are food for my soul,
Hmm.
right? And she loves all those things too. She loves
Hmm.
doing those things. But that other stuff feeds her as well. And like my attitude toward a lot of that is that's junk food for the soul,
Hmm.
you know? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I used to
junk
love
food for the soul.
movies, and it's hard for me to sit through movies. I walked out of the most recent Spider-Man, which is a blockbuster, because it became predictable and one-dimensional, and like it was just appealing to like cliches. And I could sit here and find out what the hot thing is, or I could actually just go home and like do other things like you were saying, go for a walk and think about life, or appreciate nature or something like that. Um, and it just I go, okay, we'll make the don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy. Go leave and go enjoy your night.
Yeah, that's really good that you've named that. That level of self-awareness that you have, that you could realize I'm being hooked in by the sunken cost fallacy.
It's the best fallacy in some ways. It's the trickiest, you know.
Yeah, no, we fall for it all the time. And like lately, there's this thing on like Facebook. I'm still in Facebook because I have like thousands of friends, that I've met at conferences and whatnot. And most of them
Hmm.
are philosophers. But just when you're going through the feed, when like if I'm going to the bathroom or something, that's
Hmm.
when I will, what is that called? When you multitask. I'll say,
Okay.
all right, let me see what's going on in Facebook. If I've gotten any notifications from my friends, or
Hmm.
some groups that I belong to, they'll post interesting things, articles that I want to read, and I'll save them or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, you're using it for that
But,
stuff.
but every now and then, like right at the beginning of the feed, there might be something that I recognize that I'll go, oh, and I'll look that, and then I'll look at the next one because I'm just kind of killing time, and it's an
Hmm.
entertaining light. It's a light break from my heavy duty,
Well, that's different. That's using it strategically.
heavy
Yeah.
lifting that I'm doing.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, I need a little entertainment. But like, there's this thing that comes up. I forget what it's called, news reels or something, where
Okay.
you'll see 4 or 5 videos that you could scroll across, and each one of them is like maybe a minute or two long,
Right.
and
That's
there'll
the
be
new hot
somebody like
thing.
you see in the video without you're not even reading it. You could just see like, oh, a shopping cart crashed into a parked car in a parking lot, and they're arguing about it, and you go, all right, hit the button to hear it, right? I want to hear it, right? But some of them are fake. People make them for
Oh
the
yeah, it's a whole job, right? It's an
manipulating the
industry.
sunken cost fallacy,
Hmm.
right? So there's something going on. Like one of them was this guy. They're on a plane, and this guy, he's like snoring, and so his arm is on the person next to him, and whatever. And like so, the girl next to him and the girl behind him are in cahoots, and the girl behind him starts like tying his shoelaces together or so. I forget what it was, and like you want to see what happens,
Yeah, it's like
right?
just yeah.
But then it goes on, and you're like, okay, how long is it? And you
Well,
can't
those
see, yeah, you can't see how long it is like on other videos, right? So you could literally waste a half hour of your life if they've done a really good job of manipulating the sunken cost fallacy, because you're like, now I've watched this thing for 10 minutes. I have to know what's going to
it
happen.
does become like that. Yeah, yeah.
And I fall victim to it once in a blue moon, right? But I'm aware of it, and like just naming it the sunken, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fact that you've named that for me, I think I'm now much more equipped to deal with that when I find myself in that predicament.
Well, it's tough because it's an honest instinct, right? The idea to look at a wreck or to like invest in something you've been investing in, both of those are normal instincts.
Yeah,
But then like the marketers might be the worst kind of people. They really, um,
they're evil.
well, using creativity to manipulate attention to get people to do things they actually kind of wouldn't want to do otherwise is just a really, and it's so hyper profitable, right? Like it's a really good career. If you get a job at like Hershey or IBM, or they have social brand people, like we're both too old to even think this way, but like young people are like, I could be a brand ambassador for this thing, and that would be so cool.
Yeah,
But it's like the attention economy. It's really a
right,
weird.
right. And
Um,
that's why these kinds of activities are more meaningful for folks like us. You need to be aware of all the ways in which the zeitgeist,
mhm.
commercialized, attention grabbing, zeitgeist is being manipulated, big tech, all that. Everything put together it's an endless challenge for people. And
Mhm.
a lot of them don't even realize it. They're completely manipulated by it. They lack that kind of awareness.
What's a whole? We live in this like brand. My identity can be a brand. I can just be into like 10 things. I was behind a car. I don't want to get like way off topic and start complaining, but I was behind a car and it had like 8 brands on stickers of this thing I am. And I'm an I person, and I'm a Nike person, and I'm a, it could be Chick-fil-A, it could be anything. People just go like, okay, I'm into Kanye. I like you said, with the like wasting time scrolling. Sometimes I'll flip into that entertainment tab of the news and I'm like, what is this stuff people are into? And then I'll find myself going like, what is Dolly Parton up to these days or whatever? And I'm like, no, they got me here.
Exactly.
uh,
Yeah. One of the contributors to my Rutledge Handbook on Philosophy of Meditation, who was really busy and he couldn't get the chapter to me on time, so it wound up not going in the book.
mm,
But his chapter was on rescuing cognitive autonomy from these
wow,
marketers
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah.
through, yeah, and meditation as the skill that can be employed to, rescue your cognitive autonomy.
Yeah, because it's
Attention.
pre-linguistic. That's what's so hard to talk about this, like the relationship between attention, the will, and meditation. Is it's helping you open up before you decide what to pay attention to, rather than how you're willing your decision making or something like that. It's very pre-linguistic, like at least a lot of it. In that, like I was sitting again listening to one of your meditations in a like a nature preserve near me, and there was no one around. I was just sitting on a table, and then all of a sudden, about 10 minutes into it, I just felt that I was in a forest again. I felt that the sky went on for miles and that there was like sounds traveling around me. And that if I decided to go to the bathroom, I could do that. Or if I decided to sit there long, I just had like a sense of place again that was like deeper than my busy thoughts. Um, and so then I could go, okay, well, wow, I haven't had time to notice that I've really enjoyed practicing today. And then that makes me happy I did something today. And then I'm back in my life instead of like being pulled by, like you said, it's so American culture is so awesome, right? It solves all your basic biological needs and it tells you like you don't need anything else. But just sitting in the forest with a free meditation that some passionate person wanted, like that was actually, I don't know, it was worth like 30 or $40 if I had to make like some equivalent statement between, buying sandwiches and things. And it's so tricky. It's tricky to talk about. Does that make sense? I don't know. That felt very like,
It makes total sense. You aspire to get into a non-verbal mode when you're meditating, internal dialogue, monkey
mm-hmm.
mind, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Most of that is verbal. Not all of it, but
Mm-hmm.
bulk of it is verbal. So when you say pre-verbal, I would just say non-verbal. But the
Okay,
link,
that's probably better. Yeah.
yeah, no, but there's nothing wrong with pre-verbal because when you get there, you're going home in a sense because you started out pre-verbally with attention and
Well,
awareness.
right. Like evolutionarily, like this,
Yeah,
all this.
evolutionarily and even also developmentally as a child.
What do you mean? Could you break that down for me a little bit?
Well, when you're an infant, you have no language. You're nonverbal.
You don't think
You
little
don't.
gaga words are flying around everywhere?
Yeah, words that you hear are like bird chirpings and
Mm.
the sound of truck engines and what. Like you don't even know that speech has a meaning at first. It's just pure sounds and pure. In fact, it takes a while. What do they call this? Object permanence in
Right.
development psychology, right? So prior to object permanence, there are images and sounds and shapes and
Hmm.
movements, and you don't even know that these are my hands. Even though little kids can grab, they don't realize, much. Like they don't have the concepts. Concepts are linguistic,
Hmm.
or they're almost the same, right? Language is the clothing or the medium of communicating concepts, right? So forming objects like my hand and your finger, the little baby grabs your finger.
Hmm.
Concepts don't even happen. Like animals, animal cognition at some level might be conceptual in
Hmm.
primates and whatnot, but like a lot of it, that's the evolutionary part, is not even conceptual.
Wow.
It's just perceptual,
Hmm.
right? So, but in human development, we go through the evolutionary history in our own development because we start out as single-celled organisms, and then we diversify, we have organs, and and then we're born, and then it takes a while before we have object permanence, where we start realizing that perceptual phenomena are clustered in groups around objects and they're stable. So
Hmm.
when the image of my mother comes into the room and then leaves, it's not just a ghost that appears and then disappears,
Sorry.
that
Yeah.
comes in and out of existence.
Right.
She exists and she's just not here now,
Hmm.
right? That's object permanence, right? So that's verbal. Like you, once you got that, you've got some kind of concept of a thing.
Hmm.
That's a thing. It's an object.
And
And
as soon as you're
objects are,
there, you're starting to get into this linguistic world. Boom, right
yeah,
away.
the conceptual world is a precondition of the linguistic one.
Hmm.
Words are just signals. They're encryption. They're sounds that we associate with concepts to communicate.
Jeffrey Hinton, who
Concepts are
works, yeah,
pre-verbal. Concepts themselves are pre-verbal, but we
uh-huh.
also have a preconceptual stage. Before object permanence, there's no concepts. There's just images and sensations and phenomenological qualia and things like that. And I
Hmm.
think I
Well,
could
and
be
then
wrong.
the stillness of the pond metaphor, right? Like that lets you kind of just turn everything down from 1,000 down to like a 10, and then everything kind of reconverges into its oneness, right? Like usually people calm down and then realize how much simpler and clear things are. And I've heard it, like what you're saying kind of reminds me of that quite a bit, because it's like this hectic sensory chaos that like is like an animal baby feeling, and then that's all, like you calm that down, and the linguistic, like they probably reciprocally calm down together.
Yeah.
um
Yeah, all of it slows down and calms down as you meditate, right? And so
yeah.
you wind up going back into that oceanic, and Freud thought it was regression in an infantile.
Oh wow, he would say that's regressive, really, like a state of
Yeah,
meditative.
you're going into an infantile state, that oceanic feeling that you had
Hmm.
when you were in your mother's womb and all there was one, and it was all peaceful and happy and blissful, and you were floating around in the, in the liquid there. You know, the feeling of oneness is
Huh.
infantile for Freud, but from a Buddhist or a Hindu perspective, no, you're going, or a Neoplatonic perspective, you're going into the one out of which all differentiation emerges, you
Hmm.
know. Um, so if you succeed in meditative quieting, like quiescence, mental quiescence,
Mm.
total stillness, then duality disappears, and it is an oceanic feeling. And it's not verbal at all. It's not conceptual at all.
Hmm.
It's indescribable or ineffable.
And that's
because
when Buddhists will start saying like, oh, we the ego was the whole problem and we just killed the ego.
yeah.
And but you're saying like, no, 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 even like volition, there's still volition at that state, right?
Oh, that was part of what I said in my summation of the
Yeah,
four
let's hear your
truths. That I don't remember exactly how I put it, but I think that like when you're in a flow state, this is what I said. Part of what I said. When you're in a flow state,
ooh,
that suffering, that spontaneity thing happens. There's a harmony between your intentions, your goals that you're intending toward, and your activities. It's just
mm-hmm,
spontaneously moving in the right direction. But there's volition. There is volition. There's
mm-hmm,
volition. Your volitions are in harmony, though, right, with your actions and your goals. If you didn't have a goal, right, like surfing to stay on the board and ride that
mm-hmm.
wave, if you didn't have that goal, you would fall over. It's a sensory motor loop that you're sensing how the board is and how your body is, and you're making the adjustments so that you stay on the crest of the wave, this
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. That requires intention, a sensory motor feedback loop, awareness of your location in space. All those things are spontaneous, but that doesn't mean that they're involuntary. There's volition or
Mm.
voluntariness, right? Like if something happened, like if you were surfing and you saw a person drowning, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're not like numb to
You
your
would jump
environment.
off
You're
the
still.
board and
Mm.
you would be out of the flow state and you would have a new, unless if you were an enlightened being, then even that might happen in a flow state, right? If you were a fully enlightened being. But I don't know if there is such a thing
Right.
as a
So,
fully enlightened
well,
being.
that's a problem with modernity, right? Is this desire to get somewhere, like an ultimate cause? Is that or not even an ultimate cause, right? It's different than Aristotle's notion, but there's
It might
this.
also be mythic exaggeration that develops over the course of the centuries, like an example, I don't mean to disparage Moses or the parting of the sea story, but maybe it was a low tide and a sandbar, and
Oh
like
yeah.
just I'm using this as an
Hmm.
example.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a real miracle, but maybe it was just a low tide and a sandbar and serendipity that when the Jews got there, they could go through, and by the time they got away, the tide raised up and the Egyptians couldn't follow them. And then that story over time was Moses parted the sea, right? Because God was on our side, the telephone game, the story, the embellishment,
Hmm.
or like in Buddhism, you've got Buddhism spread from India throughout Southeast Asia, all the
Hmm.
way to Japan, and then came back, right? And so there are texts and versions in the different languages, Korean, Japanese, whatever, right? And then scholars can analyze them and say, these stories only occur later. They're not in the original version, right? And
Hmm.
those are miracle stories that weren't in So that's just an example. Like I'm
That's
not sure.
tricky. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this kind of thing. So like
Mm.
and it even happens with people that like maybe a relative that was like a stodgy, grouchy old bastard, let's just say. And then after he dies, your cousins who were his children or something, they sanctify him. Oh, he was so great. He was so great. Like there's ways in which stories of, legendary characters might be exaggerated over
Let
time.
me say so. So your Nathan, who you said you were talking to, he said to me, I thought it was so brilliant that we need to be better at picking our stories and applying our stories, which gives agency to two really interesting things, right? That gives us like windows into opportunities and like but by picking good stories, it really like both acknowledges that you might need some stories and give you control at the same time. And the same thing of like being able to tell stories better, just like what you're doing. Like if you say, okay, well, I don't want to throw out all of Judaism, but maybe we should reframe this part to where like we're just happy they got away and it wasn't like a giant
Sure.
turtle rose up from underneath and stopped the villains from chasing down the heroes or
Yeah.
um
Yeah, so like here,
and
like you hear that, like some Buddhists will say, the Dalai Lama said that if science contradicts any element of Buddhism, we need to revise Buddhism, right? So, like, Buddhism is very pro-scientific, right? And you hear those kinds of claims. And then you'll hear people who, in the same vein, will say there are no miracle stories in Buddhism, and the Buddha was against miracles, and this and that. There are stories where the Buddha came upon some yogi who was practicing to try to walk on water, and the Buddha said, like, why don't you just take the ferry? I don't know if these are made up stories, but then there's a story in the pre-enlightenment experience of the Buddha when he was fasting to the point of his asceticism was so strong that he could see his spine through his belly, right?
Yeah.
His ribs and all. Like, that's an exaggeration. You can't see your spine from the front. I can't imagine that you could live long enough and still be alive. And right, that's an
Mhm.
exaggeration. And another one is that, okay, a woman saw him lying by the side of the tree. She had had a vision of him, thought he was a god, offered him rice milk or something like that, rice porridge or whatever. He eats it, and just at that time, just at that moment, um, a boatman was going by with a music teacher instructing his students on the guitar strings or the lyre. Can't be too tight or it'll snap, and it can't be too loose or it won't play music. It has to be just right. And that's when the Buddha realized the middle way. You know, indulging as a prince, starving as an ascetic, those are too tight and too loose. It's in the middle. I have the porridge. I can have a little food. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to change my meditation technique, right? And I'm not going to get up until I've reached enlightenment, which is not a middle path approach, by the way.
Well, yeah.
That's not a
Meditation
middle path.
sickness I've learned about in the last year, and I find it really interesting.
Right. But, like, how can you, and I don't want, I know there are Buddhists for whom Buddhism is a religion and they treat the Buddha almost the way Christians treat Jesus. And I don't mean to be
There's hundreds
insulting.
of types of Christianity and even
Yeah.
Judaism and
And
Buddhism
Buddhism,
and
right. Right. So
Hinduism.
I feel bad making these criticism, and I love the Buddha and I
Well,
love
let's
Buddhism.
just say it out loud. Let's stop and do Anagage and just say we're having a good faith argument right now and just
Yes,
try
we
to,
are.
I think this is really interesting issues just to kind of wonder about.
Yeah, it's important to be open-minded, and I'm a philosopher, so that's my excuse. I have a pass, and it's called There Are No Sacred Cows in Philosophy, and it's on my little pass,
Well,
right?
that's interesting moral, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. Like, we need to be open-minded. We can't be afraid to challenge beliefs.
How do you, as a religious person, kill your darlings? Because I know, like, I used to play competitive card games, and I actually won a lot as soon as I learned that rule, and almost always was better when I was kind of being mindful of it after I learned that you should not, when you're trying to like thrive, have sacred preferences. Um, and that's a tough one. Like I was just saying for cards, like, but religiously, like it's really tough too because you can get into a story or a maxim. Like anything adaptive can be maladaptive. It seems like.
Absolutely. I think I'm not sure if I know how to pronounce the name because I've seen it written more than I've heard it spoken. I think his Hui Nang, like the third Zen patriarch.
Oh, he was in your meditation today. I think you were talking about him, the one I listened to earlier today. I mean,
Okay, cool. Yeah. So then this is synchronicity because that was recorded months ago.
it was,
Uh,
yeah.
and I think the saying is the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Was that the quote?
That's what you said. Yes, exactly. It
Yeah,
was about
yeah, okay, yeah.
preferences.
And I heard that first time I ever heard it was from Ram Dass, who spoke that at a thing I was at. So I wasn't sure if that how to
That
pronounce
was the phrase, yeah. And I did the whole Lectio part, and I said it out loud, and then I paused, and then I did it in my mind and paused, and I kept trying to let associations come
it. Oh,
up.
that's great.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I love the Lectio Divina thing. People who've never had any experience with that, it moves them when they do it the first time.
Well, it's
It's a really
conceptual, but
powerful.
it's effective and it's participatory, and
Yeah.
I like it a lot. John does too. Have you seen his like talks on it? I know it's not as
No, I've
serious
heard
as
him
much.
mention it, but I haven't seen him delve into it.
You
Um,
guys talk again soon, like just bring it up, and I'm sure it could be really interesting to hear you get because your version is different than his, but I think they're both getting at exactly the same
Yeah, there's
thing.
many different ways of doing these things,
Hmm.
you know. I'm sure that there are very specific ways that Christian monastics practiced it, and
Mm.
you know, the first time that I was exposed to it was through a guy who's an anthroposophist, whatever that means.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anthroposophy is kind of like theosophy. So theosophy is the wisdom of God. So it's a kind of mystical like approach that kind of blends like the religion, all religions together, but like in a very Hindu blend. Like
Uh-huh.
Madame Blavatsky was a theosophist. She was a famous medium.
Okay.
The anthroposophy is something like that, but less, a little bit less mystical. But this guy, he was the director of the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society, which was I forget, was it a retreat, a conference that we were at, and he guided us in a Lectio Divina, and he wrote about it in his book, something about when contemplation becomes love. I forget the
Hmm.
title of the book.
That's awesome.
Contemplation as a new way of knowing, or whatever. Arthur Zions,
Okay,
but
I'll find it and link it and stuff. And
oh yeah, I can send you a link, but it's Zajonc. I don't know what ethnicity that is, but he pronounces it Zions, like the word
okay,
science.
that's great.
Arthur. Yeah,
In
but yeah.
Austria, we study science.
Yeah, but he said you first you read it out loud with the text in front of you. Then you read it mentally. That's
Hmm.
stage two. And he likened it to three rings of a bell. And then stage three, according to his approach, is you listen to what it says to you.
Hmm.
You let the passage speak to you. It's you almost like you invoke the Holy Spirit in the religious context. You open up the book to a passage in the Bible. That's why it's
Hmm.
Divina, divine word.
Right, right. I
Right?
know the Christians like own quite a bit, but I think it links back to the Stoics and, like you said, other traditions as well.
Yeah, yeah. But even the phrase Lectio Divina means divine word. So it means scripture. So they'll open up the Bible, fasten on a scripture, whether it's random or pre-selected, as in Bible study, or we're going to go through this, each sentence, I think John does something like that with Spinoza's ethics.
Right, exactly. Very similar, internalizing through participating with each phrase and each
Yeah, and
idea.
philosophical fellowship had an element of that in there.
Hmm.
Um,
Right, yeah, it's kind of almost scaled up group
it's group,
Lectio.
yeah, group, yeah. I love the practices. I lost where we're going or what started us
No,
down
I
this.
was just wondering your thoughts about Lectio, and because John talks about it too, and yeah, I like it a lot. I think it reminds me of almost probably the way they were reading in the Middle Ages or like
Yes.
pre-modern. And this idea, it's very dialectic in the sense that like if the human brain can never just be an isolated thing and it always needs to be interacting, like the way you're interacting with the text, especially if you just go, okay, I'm in a faith or I'm a philosopher, and this is like I can do this once a month or once a day or once a week, and it's like a way to deepen your relationship with your practice. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, and like the new agey kind of was it daily affirmations?
yeah, John criticizes
Is
some of that for being a little too
Yeah,
naively
that's kind of
optimistic. And
derived from that, and that can be useful. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the Stoics worked with affirmations, but there would be like an insight affirmation, an insight that you encapsulate in a phrase that becomes like a mantra for you.
hmm
You remember it intentionally, periodically. It's
well, you
also,
like Epictetus ready to hand, like this makes things really ready to hand.
yeah,
If especially if you say, okay, I don't have enough Sopperson, I'm going to pick 10 parts of my book that emphasizes that well, and I'm going to study that for a month. Um, and it's just really clever. I mean, because I know people for computer programming that will read books all the time, and they're growing this knowledge, just massive knowledge, and they become these awesome architects of computer programming. But the religious person I never thought had something like that, or the philosophical person, just to even keep it away from religion as much. But it's really cool that I can go, okay, well, Plato's a great example. You can just take a dialogue and do some of that with some of the ideas, or Epicurus, or any of the Stoic maxims, or Marcus Aurelius. I remember when I was writing my master's, I would like sit for 15 minutes in my living room in Michigan, and then I'd open up a page from the Meditations, and it would say like, there's going to be scoundrels and yada yada yada, and I'd go, oh, those are like the things that are stopping me from writing today, and I would write a little more. I'd answer an email that I was putting off, or things like, or maybe I wouldn't, and I would just sit in my solipsism and not really act, but I would always kind of use it to motivate me, and it did. And that's really cool that you're just teaching it to your students casually in the middle of meditating, because I didn't see a lot that were about Lectio, but
I haven't done it in quite a while. Maybe
but you
I'll
have
do
a
that.
mantra though, isn't that very similar?
I have a couple of
Or
them.
a few, yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of them, but there's two that I've worked on for the most of my life. One is a Tibetan Buddhist one, which like millions of Tibetans chant all day long, and they have them on like these cylindrical things on sticks that they'll go and spin it, and it spins around, and the mantra's printed on there, and it's as if they're,
Oh, I've done that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's the mantra. The most popular one is Om Mani Padme Hum.
I
Um,
took a PowerPoint and put each word in the middle of a slide, and then put a black dot behind it, and I just scroll the forward button, and you can kind of get to almost like the quicker rate, and it becomes like a faster participation with the mantra. It's very I could see why that would work. And I was like, that documentary that I'll send you that I was telling you about, they had a guy that did like 100,000 chants as part of this massive like life quest he was going on this mountain, which just sounds very similar to what you're saying.
I forget where I found it years ago, but I gave a presentation somewhere a few times on meditation with a PowerPoint, and I found a, a really good visual moving version of that spinning wheel,
Wow.
and I put two of them in upper right hand corners, left and right hand corner on every slide. So, and they were spinning the whole
Huh.
time.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
so cool. I'll see if I can find that, and I'll send you that spinning one because it sounds like you will like to have one.
I love the idea of maxims and mantras, and like the